All right. So hello everyone. Welcome back again to another video. This is round 5 of ABP 2023. The info status as follows. Since 99, various bodies such as the UN, the EU, and the US have placed sanctions to the Taliban and Afghanistan more broadly. They fall generally into two categories: economic sanctions, like the suspension of developmental aid and the widespread freezing of government assets, and non-economic sanctions like arms embargoes and travel bans. And the motion is this House would lift economic sanctions on the Taliban. For this particular motion, we were closing government. And this was again the top room. We were up against Sunway 1 on OG, Ateneo 1 on OO, and closing up and US 2. And this is definitely, I think I would just be very proud about myself for this particular speech and say that I really do genuinely think this is one of my favorite speeches of all time that I've given for myself, and I'm so thankful that this one was recorded, that I could review it on video for your content, and it's quite nice that I really want to go over this for this one. So let me just give you the context for what's going on in this debate. So the motion is this House would lift economic sanctions on the Taliban, and uh opening half is very exhaustive. They run a whole lot of arguments that explain why economic sanctions are good or bad. So OG explains that economic sanctions create third party harms. The third party harms are very bad. It might lead to the collapse of Afghanistan. It harms innocent civilians. And they also explain that economic sanctions economic sanctions turn Afghanistan more to other or the Taliban more to other proxy actors, like other rogue actors like China, like Russia, etc., etc. And they explain the variety amount of ways as to why this is likely to be bad, and why we should lift the sanctions so that at least at minimum we do not cause this type of harm. Um, to be fair, at this point, it's also quite unclear, relatively, from my perspective, as to what opening government's comparative necessarily is. And so when I was listening to the debate, I knew that I had to make an extension based on what this comparative would likely look like, why conditions are likely to get better, and why lifting economic sanctions is an inherently negotiating and improving condition. And now I want to just talk about what opening up does. Opening up responds actually quite good as well, right? And give a lot of comprehensive arguments too to say that economic sanctions are likely going to be done in a very targeted way, in an effective way, to try and uh make them weaker, the Taliban weaker in Afghanistan. And and I will note that they actually go very hard line here, and quite to their interest, quite very strong in claiming that uh weakening the Taliban is the most important thing in this debate for XYZ reasons. We reduce the power and stronghold that they have. This is good because it allows us to have the flexibility to intervene in Afghanistan again and topple the government so that we could change the administration. And they also give some reasons to explain at opening up that, even in the worst case where the Taliban collapse, right, as a consequence of the sanctions, this is a good thing because it means that they become more desperate. It means that we have the opportunity to restructure the government and be able to start anew in Afghanistan because the Taliban are so irredeemable in this particular instance. I want to note, as a point here, right? Um, Opening Gov also tries and compromises with many of these types of characterizations of the Taliban. They are also saying that the Taliban are unreasonable in many circumstances, but they say that we should still lift economic sanctions because it's the best thing that we could do right now, so that we don't embolden this anger more. That having the government at place right now is the best thing over all other things, but the sanctions itself are just very bad. And opening up, doubles down, says Taliban irrational, they're hopeless, we should never do this no matter what. I had my fact book with me, and I have some knowledge that I've taken up from my books that I've read long ago, and like books from Brian Class and all of this other stuff. And I'm quite excited. So I have in prep time, I've had this idea to actually just explain the simple claim that the Taliban are not as extreme and as radical as we might perceive them to be, but more importantly, that lifting economic sanctions empowers the most technocratic elements within the Taliban in the Afghanistan government, the ones that are administrating the government. And that is why it is most likely that if we are to lift economic sanctions, we open the door for more negotiations as opposed to economic sanctions leading to more radicalization in the future and empowering the war hungry segments of the Taliban. And so I did want to double down on this particular fact and use these facts in a way that would merge and respond to the opening half debate and say that this is the most reasonable characterization of the Taliban in Afghanistan and the way in which they would cooperate and operate in this particular instance. And I also wanted to still like integrate my analysis to why this supersedes the the analysis of OG that third party harms are quite bad, because that's still a super strong argument and it's still a super strong claim that exists, and opening up validly does have still a super strong claim that exists that we should just not trust them because we already have bad faith with the Taliban now. Why are we still gonna hope for reconciliation in the future? So I'm in this position where I have brilliant matter. I have a brilliant opportunity to build my case. I personally think this is a masterful way to approach the debate. And so let's just go and review it right now.
Pakistan is a nation of many
That's Afghanistan, by the way. It's not Pakistan as you see in the screen.
peoples. The Taliban need these people for their governance to succeed. Our win condition at closing government is that we will demonstrate that the Taliban have an incentive to cooperate with the peace process within government, so long as the international community lifts these sanctions now, then later. My argument will be very simple. I'm going to talk about continued internal political cooperation with the power sharing agreement that is currently in place within the Taliban. I have 2 points of context then to explain why this is important at the top of this speech. These are facts, and this is irrefutable in this debate. Number one, the Taliban is currently operating under an interim government operated by fragments of the previous government under Afghani, or multiple political parties from previous different ethnic groups, and the Taliban technocrats, which compose the majority of the cabinet members and the political party members that have been appointed to the Afghan government. So sanctions, as we will argue later, increase these divisions, and you empower the more radical elements and decrease the power of the technocratic elements and the more sane elements within these groups, which is why lifting these sanctions is going to make it easier for us. Note that the Taliban technocrats in the cabinet are not warlords, like what opening up claims. Many of them empirically are UK educated, their spokesperson is Oxford educated, and many of them do have educational degrees and are willing to work in government, and they do have governance experience. It actually does include a lot of economic ministers as well, from the Ghani administration and other individuals, because structurally, the Taliban, like in terms of number, by the way, are a minority in the greater majority of Afghanistan, which is why it is likely the case that they will need the cooperation of these individuals to be able to do this. Like, even the military is diversifying. 130,000 as of 2020 in the National Army, not majority Taliban members, and because they are different paramilitary militias from different groups that have also been fragmented as the consequence of the takeover from 2019. Number two, the Taliban has already begun to accept the conditions towards political reconciliation in the Afghanistan government. In November 2020, they accepted $12 billion in aid up until 2025 from different international organizations so they could submit themselves to audit by international organizations and the financing of government revenue collection, expansion, and the political diversification of the government. Again, these structural reasons will be built later. Having said
Yeah, so I want to just point out that like I really just wanted to get the facts out of the way at the beginning. And I think that's like at this point I'm already winning the debate. I'm quite confident already. But I just wanted to say that it's definitely important that I'm already framing it in this particular way, because opening up was already saying that the Taliban are hopeless. They are not ceding to any demands that we've already made against them. And at some point in the debate, they were saying that we could lift sanctions at some point if they are proven to agree with us. So I just provided the fact that yeah, they are already cooperating, and that is why is the best time to lift economic sanctions, but only doubling down sanctions more is what increases bad faith with them, and that makes it worse. I also wanted to point out that like I really like, in retrospect, right? I really like this point on the military diversifying. Later on, I raise a POI against closing opposition where I'm saying that in the aftermath of the takeover, a lot of militias and Taliban soldiers are looking for jobs and need those jobs, and that is part of post-conflict governance. And so I wanted to prove that there was an incentive for former Taliban soldiers to join up in arms with the forces of this new government, so that they could cooperate with the new administration. And that is why it is good. It's inherent to a world where they are administering a new government without the economic sanctions, causing them to fight more against U.S. military forces or other internal forces that cause them to like create more insecurity and conflict within the government, right? So that's quite an important fact that I think I just say here, but I don't really utilize it that much until the argument. But that's just of course, this is just nitpicking particular points.
This, given that the facts are clear, let me now respond to opening up. Why then is lifting sanctions now better than lifting sanctions later? As they concede, the closing up argument will be that, we need to have the conditions, and then we'll do the conditions, then you lift it later, which is why we will say we will lift it now. 3 reasons. Number 1, empirically, as we have proven, the Taliban has already begun cooperating with international institutions. A clear example of this, an example that I will build right now, is that the Taliban has already begun accepting repatriated and displaced Afghanis that were displaced in Iran and now are trying to move back to the Afghan government because they are necessary for more employment. They're necessary for more cooperation and political institutions so that they could try and build political capital for a future election and building that. You delay that with sanctions because you make it harder for them to finance an electoral process or even building a constitution for the new government. Like, they've already cooperated with giving us information on the National Resistance Front and on ISIS in 2020. It makes it much easier for us to do this now. Number 2, structurally, it accelerates cooperation because sanctions incapacitate bureaucracy in government today. You can't form the government, you prolong the tenure of the interim government, and you make it harder for them to create viable trade terms with international patrons and organizations. Opening up says you need to trade with other countries in order for you to do this. This is why you lift it now than later, because the trade that you do brings in foreign businesses, makes it easier for you to make those businesses the core individuals you cooperate with in the diplomacy with the political institutions and political parties. So the people at the negotiating table are not likely going to be the warlords that are trading businesses with the warlord businesses. In reality, it is more likely you are getting many Afghani businesses from different multi-ethnicities, from different community groups, because it's a very big country and they have viable businesses from different natural resource extraction industries, which the Taliban has an incentive to cooperate with. So this cooperation in terms of business segment is also reinforced in our model. But lastly, unconditional aid props up the most sane members of the Afghani government. We were successful in doing this selectively because they're already in government. The technocrats are the most likely the ones.
Okay, so I just want to point out that I'm really hedging my bets here. I am really being very, very explicit. I'm really doubling down and saying that we need to lift sanctions now than later. We need to give the unconditional aid now rather than later, because OP has the room to just say, oh no, but we could do it if they've proven to be good. And of course that's like they're pending it on, we're gonna sanction, they'll improve, and then we'll improve it, we'll give the stuff later. But the debate is about lifting economic sanctions now. So I would say that unconditional aid is good. I'm doubling down and saying that on all instances, unconditional aid props up the most sane members of the government. That is why it's a good thing. And so I think this is an exceptional like third layer even if response that beats out the comparative that OP is already doing. I want to point out, by the way, that like this is really my strategy at closing government in particular, or member of government or member of opposition. I really am building during my response segment in the speech, like what's traditionally used as just a rebuttal segment, where they're just like giving responses to say, oh, that's not true, or this is not true. In this particular debate, I'm very, very explicit in saying that, yeah, if the facts are like wrong in OGOO, and that there are deep assumptions that are wrong in OGOO that I could exploit and play along with, and there's a clear condition that OP is trying to win on, which is that, negotiations can work if they will cooperate at some point, and we could lift sanctions at some point at another time. Like, that's the hint that I'm getting from closing opposition when they raised the POI early on in the debate against opening government. I just want to win the debate outright here by just saying that that's just never gonna work. we have to do this now. And so I build the reasons as to why that's the case. So that's why I like building at this point. Like I want to build these reasons and the logic behind it, the logic behind the examples as a means to really cement the example as a definitive thing, as to why it was successful, as to why it works. So I think this mutual thing, like mutually bringing up the example in a illustrative way, like I selected the example particularly like the instances where they cooperated with repatriation for refugees and instances where they cooperate with particular like aid packages. I selected those examples deliberately so that I could bring the logic out of those examples and then use that as the headline analysis for every response. Which is why my headline response is that like it's always that, oh, it accelerates cooperation because sanctions incapacitate bureaucracy. Unconditional aid props for the most sane members of government. And that the Taliban is already cooperating with international institutions. So there's an existing line of communication now. So I think it's like the structure, the way I'm building the argument here, I think is quite efficient, right? You're saying the label, giving the example, reinforcing that the example has logic behind it, and that's where it works out.
That are making those decisions. They're the ones writing the legislation. They're proposing reforms for the interim government. It makes it more likely to be this the case because the alternative is that it is more economically unstable if you pull out later or wait till later. Let me just do the argument first. Let me cook. First argument on why continued internal political cooperation is important. The Afghanistan government is again impacting here. Is a multi-party and multi-ethnic coalition of Pashtun and Tajik influential leaders who come in. For example, the government structure of Afghanistan is they have a House of Elders and they have a House of Peoples. The House of Elders composed of different community leaders and community elders and different well-renowned individuals from different groups. And the House of Peoples who are sectoral individuals from the Workers' Party and all these other political parties that are also represented within the government. Structurally, this is the case that they were also displaced as a consequence of the takeover from 2019, but they are still trying to stay in government because there's an incentive for the Taliban to cooperate with them. Now the Taliban want them to cooperate with them. But sanctions incapacitate the Taliban, forcing them to consolidate more power within government even more. This is the most important condition in this debate. What then does sanctions do, or the threat of sanctions, and how do we resolve this? Number one, when individual Taliban technocrats have their assets frozen, it becomes harder to influence them financially to cooperate with your existing power sharing agreements. Number two, when you sanction the Taliban as an organization, then you create an internal security risk within governments. They are more likely to spend their money on the military for personal security because of the threat of a coup or an alternative political party taking over and showing that they are the government party. Or lastly, withholding development aid prompts individual country leaders to also go further away from the Taliban, which breaks down future coalitions because of restraint and frustration.
They're educated. Sorry, before the POI, I just want to say that these independent three reasons are absolutely fantastic in retrospect. I'm very, very proud that I came up with three actually independent reasons that are completely separate from one another. Like, I'm very, very happy that these are different mechanisms. I just want to like really point out how these analysis points also leverage the comparative in favor of my side. So number one, I make it clear that like if their assets are frozen, which is part of the debate, an economic sanction, if that happens to the technocrats, then we cannot influence them financially with the existing power sharing agreement. That's great. Number two, so that's the technocrat level. Number two, I talk about like all Taliban level. I say that those that are within the Taliban have an internal security risk because they might have a coup. So they overspend on militarization for personal security or even militarization in general. And that is why, because they feel that the government might collapse at any time or that someone might want to take over, then they will just not have enough money to spend on the welfare and the poor and all that other stuff. So it makes the governance bad. And that kind of like reinforces OG's argument a whole lot more. If OG just says that there will just be instability, but the instability is just brought out from economic sanctions in general, I'm specifying it a little bit more in terms of, oh, there's an internal security risk, and that's why they become insecure. And then the last mechanism was that taking away developmental aid means that like community leaders distrust and resent the Taliban even more. And that's why they don't cooperate within the Council of Elders and the Council of Peoples, which I think is fantastic here, right? Because I'm already utilizing the facts that I gave earlier, like how the government is structured and why they feel that there's less and less funding in government and why that's a bad thing for stability and trust in the government as an institution, or the Taliban administrating the government. So I'm quite happy with the way that I built each and every one of these reasons. I'm not that happy about the fact that I've already run out of time here. And I'm accepting a POI at the dying minutes of the speech. But to be fair, at this point, like, it's all just cherries on top of the cake, and I'm quite happy about how the speech has turned out so far.
And they have viable, diverse businesses. That's fine. What's common is
Sorry, let's just go and repeat the POI from the time from a while ago.
Withholding development aid prompts individual country leaders to also go further away from the Taliban, which breaks down future coalitions because of restraint and frustration.
they're educated and they have viable, diverse businesses. That's fine. What's common is non-alignment with Western imposed values and ways of running a business, which means that Western firms, if they go in right now, they will be half-assed anyway. First we start them, then we put our governance, then we succeed.
It doesn't have
So opening up is actually very, like, so at this point, right? I think their strategy here, right, just to help you guys understand what they're doing. Opening up, I think, already knows that a lot of the facts are already, like, not in their favor at this point. So they're already conceding that, yeah, like, I know that there are some people that have businesses that are some reasonable segments of the population, but they're still all anti-Western aligned. So they're still doubling down on this characterization that they don't like the West. And so they say that the West, if they want to enter with their business, they'll still be kicked out and they're still gonna be non-cooperative. And so it's likely still going to fail. So they double down on their comparative again. They say, we, choke up the Taliban, we restructure it from there as the West, and then we have a new governance, and that's where we'll succeed. So that's what they're doing. This is an excellent attempt, by the way, from opening up at this point, because they're still trying to reasonably engage with our characterizations, but still doubling down on their comparative and bringing it back. I want to note I have a few choices here, right? I have many choices here that could all still win me the debate. I have the choice to say that, no, they're not anti-Western aligned. A lot of them are Western aligned, and that's not a bad thing so long as we negotiate. I have another potential response, which is to just say that, even if they are Western aligned, then there are other means for us to, like, allow the governance to still be propped up, and that's a good thing. Like, it's and that's why lifting economic sanctions will still be effective. Or I could just deprioritize this issue entirely, right? So there are all different options that are possible. I could also just do all these responses and then layer them at the same time. But right now, again, I only have 1 minute left, so I opt for one response instead.
to be Western businesses all the time. We think the ADB is a partner of Afghanistan, who they were a member of before 2019, and they are going to be a member of if they accept these conditions. And also, like, India and Pakistan are the more likely trade partners because they're the larger export industries within these countries. So, like, cooperation with globalization or the trading process, businesses entering into these countries, empirically amazing, fantastic. What
Yeah, so that's basically my response. I just say that, Western businesses entering is not the most important thing. So even if they're anti-Western aligned, they're not the likely traders anyways. And so the Taliban and Afghanistan are able to trade with other nations that they have an interest in trading with. And actually, like, implicitly, I'm already adding, like, an entirely new argument that I could have run anyways, which is, like, the regional security and regional peace argument, that you don't want Afghanistan and the Taliban or other countries in the region to feel that they do not have endorsement to negotiate with the Taliban in Afghanistan if the West continues to sanction Afghanistan and the Taliban. And so I think right now I'm essentially just saying that, it's good for the region. It's good for the region if we lift economic sanctions. And I'm very, very happy with the way that this response turned out, because I'm adding new material, but I'm also just responding to the POI in quite a direct way. That's the easiest pathway to making the POI lose at this point.
What does this mean? Employment, work in government institutions, local governance, the ability for you to restore government institutions from the ground up, being able to allow charity organizations like the ADB, like the IRC, or like the Red Cross to be able to continuously intervene and go into these places and set up businesses, set up places, set up institutions to build up government from its front. We gave you the facts of closing government. We think that they are irrefutable because I think they are facts, and I'm very confident they are facts. And for these reasons, because we even argued all the reasons as to why they are likely to be facts, we win.
Yeah, no, I'm quite happy about the speech. I think it's quite definitely nice. So I'll just have a few learning lessons from this one. Facts matter. I love facts. I think that, more importantly, facts can be deployed very well when meaningfully accompanied with logic. And I think that the lesson here is that I really like it when you don't just spam the facts alone. I mean, of course, I'd love it if you still say the facts, right? If it's a choice between spamming and not spamming, or not saying the fact at all, then just say the fact, right? But if you really want to maximize the potential of the fact and the matter in a debate, being disciplined to know where to position each example and how to leverage this into an analysis point is actually the most important exercise here. So for me, I'm quite deliberate in saying that, oh, if I'm gonna make it about other countries trading with the Taliban in Afghanistan, I use that when it is necessary. Or if it's an analysis on, it's about which individuals are in the government, like the elders or the council politicians from different community leaders and sectoral groups, then I'll use that when it is necessary in the analysis. And I will also explain, like, sanctions prop up particular members over others, and what are the mechanisms of how this happens. And then I'll use the logic from there, right? So yeah, I think this is great. A fantastic round. It was a great debate from all parts. And it's quite an interesting. Like, I really like this case study because it demonstrates that even like a very initially unintuitive characterization, which is that essentially that the Taliban are not all unreasonable people, and that they have some segments that are very, very cooperative and willing to administer over Afghanistan in a very reasonable way, is a very, very good leverage point that can simply beat out a very, very well built and comprehensive, well impacted opening half. Especially in an IR debate like this, where in high level rooms, this can be very, very, very difficult to overcome. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful day and enjoy.